Foreign policy is a matter of costs and benefits and not theory. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today is geopolitics involving Sri Lanka. Joining us this evening on the show are Attorney at Law Javed Yusuf, Neelan Nirundan, Foreign Policy Analyst, Udita Devapriya, Chief International Relations Analyst, Factum, as well as the very vocal Dr. Harinder Vidanage, Senior Lecturer of the Kotalawala Defence University. On to my immediate right today to pose questions from our panelist is Nadim Majid, and on to my immediate left is Shihar Ranis, Executive Director for the Centre for Investigative Reporting. Let's get the ball rolling today with Javed Yusuf, Attorney at Law. Javed, interesting times. Is it interesting times, Javed?
In Sri Lanka, there is never a dull moment.
Why is it interesting? Why is it interesting times?
Well, we all know we are struggling to come out of an economic mess, and in the process of that, there are so many challenges. One of which is, of course, that we are very dependent on the international community and our friends in the international community to try to help us out. So while doing this, we have to also sensitively deal with the various demands, with various interactions between different countries, and because of our geographical location, also we are caught up. So, it is interesting to watch, but I'm sure it's not that interesting for people who are actually dealing with it. But as Sri Lankans, we can be both satisfied, gratified that the world still is interested in us, but there are challenges, as we all know.
You say, Javed, that because we are at a very crucial location, that is helping us at the moment. But don't you agree that we are getting a little bit too much of attention right now internationally? Just look at right now. We have the Iranian president visiting Sri Lanka. We have the Communist Party members from China visiting Sri Lanka. We have members of the Ayodhya shrine in India visiting Sri Lanka. We have US soldiers visiting Sri Lanka for a joint operation. A lot of activity right now at a very decisive time. Aren't we getting a little bit too much attention?
Well, I won't say we are getting too much attention if we are able to handle all that. Because as I said, there are competing interests in the region. So those interests have to be managed by us without affecting us negatively. So that is the challenge, really. And I think our foreign policy challenges, I won't say are being handled very well, but then again, it's a difficult job at this point of time.
So Javed, I recollect a few years ago, before Donald Trump came into play in the United States, the United States had a very bipartisan policy. Even though respective governments change, they've always maintained the same foreign policy right throughout. However, in 2015, things completely shifted. Why in 2015? The Obama administration went on to sign a nuclear deal with Iran. 2018, when Donald Trump came into play, he revoked it. 2023, Joe Biden said that they are willing to go back into the negotiating table with Iran on the nuclear deal that was signed in 2015. And 2023, now we're talking about an election in the United States which may change the political dynamics completely once again. How important is it for countries to have bipartisan foreign policy?
Well, the answer is obvious. It is very important. And historically in Sri Lanka too, we have adopted that on very important critical issues, particularly when we have dealt with India, when dealing with the issue of stateless persons. with regard to Kachativu and so on, always, and particularly you will recall when Mrs. Bandaranaike was Prime Minister, I think it was the Indian stateless issue. When she was arriving at an agreement, before she signed, she rang up Mr. Dudley Sennaike, who was the leader of the opposition, got his consent. So that has stood us in good stead, because now you can see, even though Kachativu has become a political question in India because of the elections, we are sitting fairly pretty on that, because we were able to use our influence and get what we believed was our due. So that all was because the parties, or the main parties, gelled together at critical times.
Thank you very much, Attorney at Law Javed Yusuf. I now move my attention towards Neelan Nirundan, Foreign Policy Analyst. Neelan, why is every single time there is an election in India, Sri Lanka becomes a hot topic? Javed just mentioned about the Kachativu Islands, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi went on to say that Kachativu Islands should have never been given to Sri Lanka at the first place. What are your thoughts? Why is India influencing us a lot in terms of our foreign policy?
So in terms of the election, as you rightly pointed, there's always this tendency to draw neighboring countries into the limelight. And if we could just take the Kachativu issue, for instance. So as I'm sure all of you know, the BJP in India, one of their major focuses for this election campaign is breaching the frontier of Tamil Nadu, where they've never really been able to establish a foothold, and they've been investing a great amount of time and energy into securing at least a 20% vote bank in Tamil Nadu, which is what the BJP is looking for. So Narendra Modi has made more visits to Tamil Nadu in the last 4 months than to any other place in India or the world for that matter. And the other more long-term goal of this is to establish that Narendra Modi's foreign policy is a lot more robust and muscular, so to speak, than the traditional Nehru-Gandhi foreign policy agenda in India. Because even if we look at the statements of Narendra Modi or Annamalai, who's the Tamil Nadu BJP chief, or if we were to look at what Jaishankar Menon was saying, it all centers around this idea of Nehru and Indira Gandhi and their entire dynasty essentially giving a piece of India away, saying that it was just a rock that nobody cared about. And their major point of contention is that the previous governments, the Congress governments, have never really taken Indian sovereignty with any seriousness. So that is the major reason why the Kachativu issue became a problem here. And in general, it is a good vote play, so to speak.
If you dive into the South Indian political culture in India, Neelan, you could look at in 2019 parliament election, the BJP emerged as the single largest party in the South. And if you look at the most powerful parties in Tamil Nadu, it's AIADMK and DMK as a whole. Who do you think would make their prominence felt at the future elections?
So as you said, in 2019, the BJP made huge inroads into the south, but in Tamil Nadu, they got less than 3% of the vote, as in they got less than nota, none of the above. So that's always remained a frontier that they need to breach. Right now, all the polls suggest that the DMK is the front runner because the opposition votes have already been broken up. It's usually the AIADMK, as you pointed out, allying with the BJP. So they end up being able to draw some votes, but now they've split as well. So right now, the DMK in Tamil Nadu is the leader so far.
Neelan, do you in any way believe that a Sri Lankan president who would be appointed in the country will have to have the backing of India to make a formidable footprint for himself moving forward?
I certainly do think so. I mean, right now, especially with India's growth and India's growth kind of being protected from this global slowdown that we are seeing. For whatever reason, the Indian economy is not slowing down the way that many other large economies are. So whoever comes to power, both diplomatically, politically, and even, culturally, would have to kind of mend ties.
Who is India supporting at the moment? Is it Anukumar Dissanayake, Sajid Premadasa, or Ranil Wickramasinghe?
So right now the first name and the third name are the two names that are thrown about in New Delhi more often than not. So I don't think they have a very, very clear picture as of yet, but the first name that you mentioned and the final name that you mentioned are
Anukumar Dissanayake and Ranil Wickramasinghe.
Yes, yes.
But don't you think it's a little bit unfair? A foreign country trying to dictate terms in a sovereign nation like Sri Lanka, and that should not happen in the first place.
Yeah. So I don't necessarily think that they're looking to manipulate or engineer elections here, but I think as any regional power would, they have their clear favorites, and they have certain leaders whom they think we could move forward with productively. So for example, if you're the United States and let's say you're Vladimir Putin, you would want Donald Trump to be in power. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that you will now go all out to engineer American elections, even though there are...
Why I'm saying this, Neil, why I'm saying this, if you look at the 2015 presidential election, right after Mahinda Rajapaksa lost the elections, he went on to tell the public that he lost because of India. And he made this statement very public, and this is in the public domain.
Yeah, I mean, and you're absolutely right? So in a regional dynamic like this, small...
But is that fair? Is it fair in terms of the people of Sri Lanka? Don't you think the liberty of appointing people to office is the responsibility of the people in that nation itself?
Absolutely. There's absolutely no question about that. And the issue is what kind of interference or what type of interference we're discussing. Because if they have favorites, that's something that all nations do.
Right. Thank you very much, Neil and Nirundan. You two can join in as far as the conversation is concerned. You can send in your messages to 076 656 5353. I would love to take them to the panelists as we go along. Let me now shift my attention to Udit Devapur, Chief International Relations Analyst, Factor. Udit, interestingly, I want to talk mainly about the Iranian president's visit to Sri Lanka. I'm trying to figure out the foreign policy of the Sri Lankan government at this time, pointers as to what the direction of the Sri Lankan foreign policy is all about. Now, we all know that the Iranian government supports the Houthi rebels in the south of Yemen. We all know that the Iranian government is supporting Hamas in Gaza. And in a situation where Iranians believe that it's apt for them to support the Houthi rebels, they supported them, and the Red Sea was blocked. And most of the Israeli flagships were attacked as a result. Then the Sri Lankan government decides a few months ago that they want to send in a naval vessel to the Red Sea to defend the ships that were going from the Red Sea area. So now I'm trying to figure out, who are we really supporting? Are we supporting Iran? Are we supporting Yemen? Or are we supporting the US? Shed some light, please, for my benefit.
Or are we supporting everyone in the hopes of hedging our bets against? I mean, there are many possibilities to consider here. In my view, I think what we are trying to achieve with this, this foreign policy, which has its critics, my take on the whole matter is that yes, we are dealing with the Iranians, we are dealing with the Americans, we are dealing with the Indians, we are dealing with the Chinese, and at the same time we are dealing with the Israelis. And at the same time we continue to maintain this line that we are following a non-aligned political foreign policy strategy. My take on the whole matter is that we are trying to hedge our bets. We are trying to create a safety valve against several possibilities, against one side winning against the other. So with regard to with regard to Iran, I think the whole issue there is, on the one hand, in 2007 and 2008 when Mahmoud Ahmadinejad became president, that was when the Umayyad project was basically inaugurated. So we've had this long trajectory from then till now. So I think there was a situation where we had to continue that line, and right now that was basically an economic project. With regard to the Houthi issue in the Red Sea, the excuse that was trotted out by the government was that we are out there to safeguard freedom of navigation. So on the one hand, with the Iranian issue, we are basically saying this is vital to our economic interests because it's a huge project. On the other hand, when it comes to joining the US Fleet Command in the Red Sea, what we are saying is this is in the name of safeguarding freedom of navigation. So what the Sri Lankan government, in my view, is trying to do is trot out different excuses for different postures abroad. So that's one way of looking at it. The fact that they are trying to put all these eggs in one basket and at the same time balancing different baskets at the same time. So you can call it strategic autonomy. I mean, there was one the Foreign Policy magazine, South Asia, the chief South Asia analyst for Foreign Policy magazine recently went on record. He basically described our foreign policy as strategic autonomy. But there's another line. I mean, I think it would be more correct to call our foreign policy to describe it as strategic ambiguity. Whether we are following a particular line or whether we are actually trying to get everyone in and trying to enmesh ourselves in all these rivalries in the hopes of getting some benefits out, partly because we have India and we feel that these transactions with Iran, we can do that with India above us because there won't be any major rivalry.
Udita, rather than sugarcoating this topic,
yes,
can we say that Sri Lanka does not have a foreign policy at all?
Directionless. Strategic ambiguity, I think that's the best term to use it.
So no foreign policy at all?
That's exactly what it means.
Yes.
Right. So, Udita, before I switch to Harinder, now in 2008, when no country was coming to Sri Lanka, Iran took a bold step to invest $500 million for the Umayyad project. The United States did not come with any investment. Up to date, since the end of the war, there has not been any significant investment up until last year, where there was the gas pipeline project that was carried out by the intervention of the US government. There has been nothing concrete. Who is our friend, who is our enemy?
For the Sri Lankan government, Iran is a friend, but even if the US has not given us, as you say, even if the US has not made major investments, the US is too important to lose. So I suppose the Sri Lankan government, the US is a partner it has to engage with, whether or not we get benefits from them economically. And Iran is a friend we have to engage with because they gave us money at a time when no one else did. So it's a matter of being friends with everyone. Like you said, probably directionless.
Okay. Thank you very much, Udit Deva, Chief International Relations Analyst of Factum. Shihar and Nadim, it seems a little bit like the SLFP right now. Anyway, let's now move to Dr. Harinder Udanage, Senior Lecturer of the Kothalavala Defence University. Dr. Harinder, interestingly, these are times that no country could be isolated. Everyone needs someone. And is Sri Lanka playing its cards right?
Sri Lanka is compelled to play its cards right this time. It's because I think I always feel, listening to the questions as well from you, that we are always asking simple questions in a very complex time. So I think it's it's easy to raise simple questions and it's easy to portray black and white, but you can't do that. Because if things were that easy, I don't think any of these countries would be in this situation at the moment. So we have entered a significant era of complexity. So and we are dealing with the outcomes as well as the unintended consequences of what has happened. So the fact that again arguing that we are directionless in foreign policy, versus the fact that I think we are trying to seek a direction. I probably think, of course, is kind of the thing that we should be focusing.
What should be our real focus at this point of time? Because we hear from the grapevine that the United States government has protested to the Sri Lankan government relating to the visit of the Iranian president, but this is not officially mentioned anywhere. But we hear this from the grapevine, naturally so, and we see a lot of engagement by Iran at this point of time. We have a trade deal with the tea for the 300 million US dollars worth of oil that we bought from Iran. Even though there were sanctions in the country, we were still indirectly buying some Iranian oil as well, because those are the oil that works for Sri Lankan vehicles. So if you look at it, who should be our friend and who should be closer to us?
I think it's not pragmatic to look at things from, I'm a strategist, I think most of us. So in strategic thinking is not very populist thinking, neither is it very appeasing. But the last thing a strategist would want, or strategic thinking wants, is to look at countries as friends. It's not
all countries as friends.
You can see countries. It's about interest. In alignment of interest, it changes. You asked about 2007 and 2008 and the United States, for example. The U.S. interest in the region and the our immediate vicinity as well as the larger region was very different from the interest that it has post 2013. So when their interests, that is one thing. And the second point is, there is an argument, we have entered a time where it's an era of super states. It's just a set of states whose interests actually dominate, whether we like it or not. And then there is this question about small states, and because the global system was never made for the small states. Though we keep on arguing about our sovereignty. These are the unpopular things, as well as the kind of things that we have to look at from a strategic term. So as a small state, Sri Lanka as a small state, what should we do? So is it about friendships, or is it about making alignments in times of where interests also align? So for example, it's pragmatic, as I think Udita pointed out also, that you maintain a multidimensional interaction from the operation in Red Sea to having this relationship with Iran. I think it's purely out of necessity that we are doing it, and I think that's not bad.
But don't you think, Harinder, sometimes we are a little bit too cherry picking? We want to only focus on the problems that we can solve and we can address to. Let's take a look at the United Nations Human Rights Council sessions. We want to distance ourselves as much as possible from that. We want to absolve ourselves from any commitment made to them. And while in a situation like sending a naval vessel to Red Sea, that was spoken by the president, seems to be an okay trend.
Yeah, I think that is because that is the contribution to the Red Sea operation was more of a strategic opportunity, and navigating the human rights conversations has been a challenge for any government in Sri Lanka. So I think what we are trying to do is at least to do some of the things that we can clearly do right from that particular perspective, and I think that is why the reading of what Sri Lanka is doing should be taken from that holistic perspective, understanding we are in a very complex situation. So from contributing a naval vessel to the Red Sea operation to having the visit of the Iranian president facilitated to Sri Lanka, I think that's a bold move still. I think if you took it from a larger, and also you have a senior leader from the Communist Party visiting Sri Lanka, I think in a way that shows we actually are sensitive to the complex.
When Justin Trudeau said that there was genocide in Sri Lanka, the foreign minister was very quick to respond, saying that that statement was unwarranted. However, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi says that that Kachdev Island should not have been given to Sri Lanka at all, there's no response.
I think that is more pragmatic. I'm not trying to say.
No, I don't know. You tell me.
No, I'm telling you
what is the direction we are having?
Through those statements, does have a larger serious ramification, and it also it requires Sri Lanka to respond, irrespective of who's in government. And the Kachathira method, I think, if you look at it from a domestic political understanding, it clearly was it's understood from you understand these are things that are said in rhetoric.
Justin Trudeau said the same thing ahead of
elections. But I think the fact
that should have been also construed as a domestic matter.
Yeah, but I think the larger thing about countries military committing genocide vis-a-vis a dispute over ownership of an islet, I think still I find if I was the Prime Minister, I would have also responded hardly and firmly for the primary. Of course, would have strategically let go of the second thing, because that I think is something secondary.
Dr. Harindra Vidanage, a senior lecturer of the Kotalawal Defence University. It's not about the $3 billion that India gave Sri Lanka when we were bankrupt.
Yeah, 4 billion.
4 billion, yes. But Harindra, it's not because of that, right?
Yeah, a lot of things factor in to certain decisions, right?
Right. Thank you very much. So you two can join in as far as the conversation is concerned. Decisive times, decisive moments for Sri Lanka. Are we really sandwiched in between nations? We will discuss all this and more after this short commercial break. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. We will be right back.
Life is a collection of moments. When you're tired and you reached your limit. When you're hurt and everything brings you down. When you're happy and nothing can bring you down. Life is a collection of moments. Jones Gold Blend Tea. For life's every moment.
Sri Lanka's precious world heritage.
Jones Gold Blend Tea. For life's every moment.
Every Saturday and Sunday at 8:30 p.m. Tune in to Shakti TV.
Jones Gold Blend Tea. For life's every moment.
Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. You too can join in as far as the conversation is concerned. 076-656-5353. The number once again, 076-656-5353 is the number to send in your messages. And I would like to take them to our panelists as the show goes along. As I said before, on to my immediate right is Nadim, on to my immediate left is Shihar. Nadim, with your permission, shall I switch to Shihar first?
Sure. Yes. Sure. Thanks, Shamir. I think Shamir went throughout all the panelists and talk about India, right? Indian role in Sri Lanka, Indian intervention. But China has become more important to Sri Lanka since the end of the war. I'll ask first question from Harinder, Dr. Harinder. How do you see the impact of the geopolitics in Sri Lanka, especially with regard to its strategic location?
I mean, of course, this is a mantra that we have been saying. Sometimes it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. This idea comes because of how certain small states have done foreign policy, engaged the world, especially in times of geopolitical rivalry. So, why the strategic location mantra, whilst it is there because of the Syria, I think the strategic location mantra has come back because of the focus of the Indo-Pacific or the Indian, the strategic understanding of the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Because Indian Ocean is not a, was not a strategic space. It became a strategic space because of a couple of factors. One is the fact that there was the emerging China, as you brought out, and the fact that China's emergence was very contingent on how China connected to the rest of the world, especially through the maritime route. So the maritime route of connecting China to the world was pretty much through what we call the world, the world's interstate in ocean spaces, which is the Indian Ocean, which is less of militarily. I mean, it is not the militaristic importance, but it was the more logistical, interest. So the recent context of why Indian Ocean has become a strategic space is because of it's kind of this conduit, right? So, and the fact that more of these states want to control the accessors, the fact that there is so much of global trade taking place, the merchant maritime traffic, everything, of course the sea lanes of traffic as well. So when you have a country rising at that speed, and the fact that it is very dependent on these ocean systems, and the fact that that rise can be contained within these ocean spaces, has made it a point where there's a convergence of strategic interests from extra-regional players such as United States, China, Japan, Australia, even India. So in that context, where Sri Lanka sits is crucial. So that is why we are, so a lot of people say Sri Lanka is a strategic location, but when you ask a question, they kind of say, but this is the actual case, the fact that it is not the fact that where we are located, but the larger space where we are located has become a serious space of strategic competition. And in that space, we sit in a very crucial position.
And there's because you mentioned earlier when you're talking about, even Udita said that strategic ambiguity is probably Sri Lanka's foreign policy. But listening to what our four panelists have said today, it appears to me that our foreign policy is to serve the interests of our partners, because we have potentially not clearly defined what our own national interests are, and whether our national, because you were talking about strategic interest, the national interest, etc., and whether our national interest actually aligns with what is the public interest. In that context, I want to ask you actually, where is, for example, if you look at how certain ASEAN nations run their foreign policy, you can see in the things they say, in what they do, in how they commit to their partners with either through aid or assistance or trade agreements, etc., that there is a very strong understanding that they have of what is in the public interest of their citizens. My fear is that in Sri Lanka, our sort of strategic ambiguity, as Udita defined it, is caused by a failure of the governors in Sri Lanka to understand what is in the public interest of the governed. Is that a fair assessment?
It's a very liberal, fair assessment. But let me be very controversial, but when it comes to foreign policy, globally, if you take any country, I don't know whether that actually represents the public interest, but it definitely represents the core strategic interests of the state, which is part economy, which is security, then the ancillary ones. For example, now things like energy is a major foreign policy plank, then things like that. So which of course feeds into the larger stability and cohesion of the state, of course, then which you can argue as which is the public interest, where that the stability of that particular state is involved. So
let me make it a bit more sort of simple for our audience as well. If you look at, do you feel that you look at like economic prosperity of our citizens should be a primary driver of what our foreign policy is. But if you look at the actions of not just liberal, conservative, red, green, blue administrations in Sri Lanka, have their policies actually served that public interest in the context of foreign policy? I'm asking. You look at, the previous administration's decision to cancel the LRT project with Japan. The even before that, under the Ahapalne administration, the whole circus around the port city. Going back, there are many of these instances which have had a cost to the taxpayer, to the citizen. When you look at it in that context, isn't it fair to say that, not just as a liberal assessment, but a general assessment that in Sri Lanka, specifically, if you look at just economic prosperity alone, that our foreign policy has not served the public interest?
Yeah, I think in that way I agree with you. The reason is, I think one of the problems we have in Sri Lanka's foreign policy is the fact that we can be, as you said, without a direction, but even few years back, the American Foreign Affairs magazine came out with a major theme saying searching for strategy, where the Americans were also saying we were lost for strategy, for a direction. Problem is not the direction, the problem is not having a set of foreign policy pillars which any person in government has to make a set of decisions. So that is the failure in the system here. The systemic failure is that we have not come up, as I always say, if we are in the opposition and the governing parties, we need still something to debate on. What has happened instead, because we don't have a set of foreign policy pillars, we start debating on matters that how each of us see the world. So our worldview becomes the debate. So that sometimes our worldview will not be the view of in the public interest.
When you really look at it, right now we're talking about a presidential election.
Yeah.
We're talking about several candidates who have come to the fora already. But none of these candidates have brought in something substantial to the table in terms of foreign policy.
That's one of the most disappointing thing about this political rhetoric at the moment. When we are at a time when we really need to resuscitate, rebuild, we don't have at least a kind of at least the basic structure. Saying this is what we would. Instead we have this domestic, political. It's so rhetorically. It's totally empty. There is no, what is your foreign policy positions? What is your structure? What is your economic? To have it's not just a foreign policy. What is your national security? What is your economic, revival plan? That at least you don't have to give a whole plan out, but to bring out the argument that we are proposing to establish this, because this is what is exactly missing in this country. Even if you are the best leaders, if you don't have it, you're not going to have anything to go forward.
Udita, I'll sort of rephrase the question. I spoke to Harinda in terms of economic prosperity, but let's say that, for example, from a policy perspective, achieving maybe not complete, but some form of energy independence would be something that you could consider that is in the public national interest, right? But if you look at how not just the foreign service, but not just from a bureaucratic level, but even at a political level, how our foreign policy and foreign services function, it seems that there is a lack of understanding of what Sri Lanka's, and that our policy is always defined by the national interests of our neighbors and our development partners, and not defined along the lines of what is in the public interest of the Sri Lankan citizen. So when you consider economic prosperity of the citizen, issues like energy independence, do you feel that understanding is absent from both the bureaucratic and the political class?
Well, I mean, if I may bring an example, in the aftermath of the, I mean, you referred to the political class as well as the foreign policy bureaucracy, but I'll take it a step further and talk about the citizenry as well. Now, if you take in the immediate aftermath of the 2018 constitutional crisis, when one prime minister was sacked and another was put in his place, you had discussions and conversations in every corner about the constitutionality of that act. You had, I mean, in various places, ordinary people were talking about whether this was constitutionally and legally sound, whether it could take place. Fast forward to 2022, when we have the economic crisis. Everyone was talking about economic policy, they were talking about economic theory, they were talking about the fiscal policies and whatnot that led to that mess. There were different interpretations and readings of what had taken place, but there was a general consensus that something had gone very wrong, and there was a debate that was urgently required. What I noticed as a foreign policy analyst was there wasn't so much of a discussion on the foreign policy aspects of that crisis at the grassroots level. There was a lot of interest. I mean, people were talking about how people were talking about China's relations with Sri Lanka. They were talking about Chinese loans and investments and so on and so forth. But there wasn't a sort of in-depth, I would say, a sort of in-depth analysis or assessment or debate about these foreign policy aspects. So my whole take on your question, Nadeem, is basically that yes, there was a lot of apathy from the foreign policy bureaucracy and the political class as well. They keep talking, I mean, particularly the political class, they keep talking politics, they keep talking about the, various brownie points at election rallies and so on and so forth. But is it because that's what the people respond to? Is it because we don't have a proper understanding of foreign policy?
But don't you think, Udita, we need to go away from that culture? We are right now looking for intellectuals to drive our country. And don't you think the order of the day should be anyone who is coming into the top office has to be focused on all these aspects?
I agree. I completely agree.
It's not anymore about having the rhetoric that the people need. It should be what is at the interest of the people at the end of the day. Don't you think so?
I completely agree. The point is that they are responding to what the people expect them to talk. So there's a bit of a dilemma here. I mean, we talk about what's in the national interest, but the problem is who defines that interest and who is going to speak on behalf of these other people, on whose, basically in whose interests these politicians are serving. Are we going to, who's going to lead them? Who's going to define what's good for them?
Yeah, but now if you look at, I'll tell you a classic example. The recently concluded presidential elections in the Maldives. The headlines right after the election was
China-friendly
candidate appointed president in Maldives. What is this? Why is it nations trying to influence the people who they should vote for? This is my same question for Neelan. Why can't independent states decide that?
Is sovereignty a convenient name we use? Let's be brutally honest here.
Neelan, actually to you, I'd like to, the same question essentially in essence that I posed to both Udita and this thing, but for you I'm going to put it in the context of Kachativu, right? And you talk about, the most obvious one that comes to mind to the layperson when talking about Kachativu and what the public interest of Sri Lanka is in terms of Kachativu is, the most obvious one is you look at the fisheries rights of the northern fishermen, of the fishing community there. That's the most obvious one that comes. Going beyond security and territorial integrity, simple things public interest wise, you talk about fisheries and all. Now it's pretty, to most people in academia, in the media, in analysts, etc., it's pretty obvious that what Narendra Modi is doing is using Kachativu as a little trump card, as you said, to advance his agenda in Tamil Nadu, and maybe even draw attention from the national media in India, draw attention away from border issues along the line of actual control in the northeast with China. But do you see this sort of push by the BJP, which is more a national party, rather than the BJP potentially gaining ground in Tamil Nadu, that it might end up actually empowering and invigorating more radical nationalist elements in Tamil Nadu, like maybe Vaiko and the MDMK or a few other sort of minor, even fringe parties, to the detriment of India's integrity, because those are almost secessionist parties in Tamil Nadu itself. And what would that mean then for Sri Lanka? Because then we could be caught in a real territorial integrity battle.
Yeah. So the positive sign for us is that these secessionist parties like Vaiko's MDMK, for example, have never been successful, and they've never really had any what you could call tangible success in any election, right? So even though it's a great rhetorical device for the successful parties to use as another feather in their cap, so to speak, it's never really been a deciding factor in any Tamil Nadu election, so to speak. It's always been the two major parties. Now, if you notice, the BJP hasn't really spoken about Kachethivu after that week. They've kind of moved on to other issues, right? And I would be very surprised if this is resurrected before the next Indian election or whatever. But if we could just link this to the discussion that was already ongoing, one of our major problems is alignment. As in, this celebration of non-alignment simply for the sake of it is, I think, as you've pointed out so far, something that we need to explore. Because even, let's just take the Asian context, right? Look at all the countries that have really shot up in the last 50 to 60 years. Saudi Arabia, South Korea, Singapore, Japan, these are all aligned countries.
Malaysia.
These are all, none of these are non-aligned nations. These are countries with a very clear foreign policy alignment over a period of 40 or 50 years. And that's when you reap the benefits of a long-term partnership. But unfortunately here, as you rightly pointed out, whom we are friendlier with changes according to who's in power here, changes according to what the regional dynamics might be. And in fact, some of the complaints from Beijing and New Delhi has often been that we are the ones in take mode and never in give mode. That we would bring someone in and then say, oh, guess what, there's too much opposition and protest on the ground. Sorry, we need to backtrack. So,
but do you believe that my assessment of it is that the reason that exists, that strategic ambiguity, as Udita probably correctly referred to it as, is because we are defining our foreign policy and our policy actions in terms of the interests of our neighbors and partners rather than in terms of the interests of the Sri Lankan public and Sri Lankan citizens.
Yes, I certainly do. In fact, my own think tank, the Center for Law and Security Studies, was created precisely to try to bridge this gap in some way, where strategic discourse at a high level here needs to be a lot more refined, and it needs to be based on what our interests are rather than what pressures are being put on us. So, for example, I would always say, and I could be wrong, but history shows us, I would say, pick one global or regional power and try being aligned with them for a certain period of time. It could be China, it could be the United States, it could be India. I mean, it depends on what exactly our balance between cultural synergy and economic assistance is, right? But ultimately, I firmly believe that if we were to strategically align ourselves unambiguously with one of these major powers, and if we were to stick with them over a long period of time, historically, we are much more likely to reap the benefits of that rather than the juggling act per se.
But Nilan, haven't we tried that and lost? Like, see, we were pro-West when we opened the economy, right? And then India was against us, right? And then we saw what happened in 1983. The history shows like India trained, armed Tamil youth, and then there was a war, right? And then throughout
India
the war,
sent in the IPKF.
Yeah, then India sent the IPKF, and there was an important Indo-Lanka accord, right? So this all because of Sri Lanka was, following this. It was taking to pro-West. The US, right?
That's true. Yes.
Yeah.
But
and then Rajapaksa regime tried to stick to a pro-Chinese policy, right? And then again, Sirisena's government, Jahapalne, they try to stick to pro-Indian policy. But nothing has worked.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. But from New Delhi's perspective, especially if we look at people like Krishna Menon, earlier top diplomat, and then the Indian diplomats throughout the 80s, New Delhi's perception of Sri Lanka was always that if the SLFP is in power here, we would be pro-China, and if the UNP was in power here, we would be pro-West. They always classified our foreign policy once again based on essentially who was in power here. So they did not see us as being aligned in one particular direction, and that was kind of the attempt to pivot us into their alignment. Now, I completely agree with you that when we stick to one power, there are complications that come along, but I was speaking more along generational lines like we see in Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Israel, Saudi Arabia, etc., where the generational alliances are bipartisan, as he pointed. I mean, there was one very important point that you guys asked in the first question, which is look at the variety of foreign interest in Sri Lanka at the moment. You have a Communist Party vice presidential delegation here, which is a political party-based interest. You have the Iranian head of state here, which is a diplomatic interest. You have from India representatives of the Ram Janmabhoomi movement in Ayodhya. That's a religious, cultural dimension to it. So when we look at the way in which countries,
and then you have the US soldiers here,
which is of a defense and military nature. So when we look at the wide spectrum of areas in which there's a lot of engagement at the moment, that's what makes me feel that alignment would serve us a lot better.
So Javed, I'm having a question, Nadine, from one of our viewers. Isn't 2024 going to be a tough year for foreign policy because of 64 countries going for elections in 2024, and this represents 49% of the global population? Javed? It's an election year.
Yeah, that's true. So we will have to see the situation after 24, because it's down the line, different elections, countries, there will be different governments coming into power. But before getting to that little more detail, I want to differ with Neelan about alignment. Maybe the countries which you mentioned have succeeded, and they have also been aligned. I don't know whether they have succeeded because they have been aligned or whether both have taken place at the same time. I would rather, for Sri Lanka, for us to be independent, but we will be friendly with everybody as we have been in the past. Because over the years, foreign policy is supposed to be an extension of domestic interests, but also it builds a profile of the country over the years. And that is why even now, what Shamir said, that there are different countries, organizations, political parties showing interest here, because we have a reservoir of goodwill over the years for different reasons. And coming back to this, I just want to take the opportunity to comment on a few points that were mentioned here. Firstly, I think our foreign policy at this point, if you can call it that, is very ad hoc. There is no policy, it's ad hoc. But then to give, if you can give credit, I have a lot of criticism about what the government is doing in the foreign policy field. But to be fair by them, this is a very unique situation where the economy has crashed. So we are virtually very weak. So we have to adopt various, well, no, I won't use the word strategy, but various courses of action, which some of which are contradictory, some of which are in fact counterproductive. Now, for instance, you were asking about the Houthis and Iran. Now, our sending the Navy ship, warship, to Iran, I mean to the Red Sea.
No, we didn't send.
I think we sent.
No, we did not. We did not.
We were preparing to send.
We were preparing. No, I don't think we did.
I don't know, they counted 24 million or something.
No, there was 40 million US dollars that was supposed to be spent on it, but it didn't happen.
Okay, anyway, if you,
did we?
I don't know. Maybe they were just hanging around in the vicinity.
Yeah, okay. Whatever it is, it was taking a stand.
Yeah.
Now, according to what I read in the media, actually the Red Sea situation was helping our port. We were getting more business. Of course, we don't want to build our business on the miseries and unfortunate situations in this. We could have just kept quiet. So there was really no reason. But now look at the approach that we are taking vis-a-vis Israel. When the Western allies are the closest to Israel. But they are finding it very difficult because there is domestic pressure, and some of them are sort of recalibrating their role or support for Israel, not much, but still. But when that is happening in the world and a lot of countries are distancing themselves, we are causing up to the Israelis. Right? We are opening a consulate in somewhere in Israel. Then we are sending all our employees, putting them at grave risk. And I find it rather, disturbing that, I see this advertisement.
But that's a political move, isn't it? You get young people employment overseas, and then you get their votes back home.
No, that's true. But that's the point. What is this Jayagamu Sri Lanka or something?
This is the
everywhere to send people out.
Israel.
No, I don't see the country getting Jaya by sending our people out and to Israel of all places, where you are in mortal scan. That comes to your point, Nadim, about domestic interests. What about these people? Supposing they get caught in a difficult situation, can we take the responsibility to get them back safe and so on?
Because we already have run into that issue in the Russo-Ukrainian conflict as well, right? Because there are, but ostensibly people who have gone willingly.
Yeah, but not with government intervention.
But regardless of whether there are now apparently people who have maybe ostensibly gone willingly, but who want to come back now.
Yeah.
And I suppose in a way at times your government exists to protect you when you do silly things overseas, or at least try to protect you as a citizen and as a taxpayer. That's maybe one of the roles in an idealistic world where you'd think they're gone. But we see that even on that front, the Sri Lankan government seems powerless really to do anything about it. And if we face, not just in Israel, anywhere else in the world, if Sri Lanka faces a similar situation, the reality is that the Sri Lankan government will be powerless to do anything about it. Isn't that right?
But knowing that you are sending, then I think there is an implication of responsibility. But coming back to this other issue, Shamir, you were asking about, is it fair for countries to interfere? It's certainly not fair, but I also think, I tend to think that this interference thing is a bit exaggerated. There may be some levels of interference at different times, but it can be interpreted. Now, for instance, if you remember 2015, John Kerry, I think, he said that they had spent a particular big amount in, I think, Asia and some other parts of the world to install democracy. But he didn't say that in particular countries, but locally that was interpreted as part of the American
regime change
in 2015. So I think there could be some degree of influence, some degree of interest and so on. Now if you take India, normally what Narendra Modi was doing with Kachativu during his election campaign is what we normally accuse the Western governments of vote bank politics. Right, that's exactly what he was doing. But I think wisely our government didn't say anything about it because
wisely
because I think we need not have said anything. But if they come to pursue it, then of course we have to take strong stands.
Do you think, Mr. Yusuf, that there should have been, because there has been almost not even an acknowledgement of the statements that have been made by BJP higher-ups, and of course it has, as Niran quite correctly said, it has cooled down now.
Yeah.
It lasted for about a week, but it was not on one occasion, it was on multiple occasions, Narendra Modi and also the foreign minister himself. I mean, Modi saying it at a rally, you can maybe disregard it, but the foreign minister, who is a very increasingly amongst diplomatic circles is a very respected figure, Dr. Jaishankar. When he said it, should the foreign ministry here, the foreign minister Mrs. Habri here, or at least a spokesperson at the foreign ministry or the media division, should there have been maybe not a statement, but at least a tweet acknowledging it and acknowledging and reiterating Sri Lanka's sovereignty over Kachat.
But Shamil, just let me, sorry. I agree. My first instinct would be to say, no, that's a closed chapter. But I think in the given situation, no harm. But of course, the only person who said something about it was Douglas Devananda. He made a public statement on that. But what is more worrying is when all these countries which are becoming more powerful, like India, and we are more indebted to India, it is up to us to resist and manage any attempt to intervene. Now my worry is, you take the fishing thing, this bottom trawling, southern fishermen coming. A few months back, I was horrified to hear the foreign minister saying on your Pathikada program that they are considering giving licenses for them to come and fish here for South India. And in the same breath, he says, before referring to that, he says very difficult to control it. Now, even if you give licenses, it's going to be worse. Yeah. So we should not get into those positions.
What are your thoughts on that? Should have the Minister of Foreign Affairs or someone from the diplomatic circle responded to that after Jaishankar's statement?
Yeah, let me respond. I think I want to reiterate something. I think we have been talking, we started this program on geopolitics. Why are we talking about geopolitics? Because there is a general consensus that we are living in time of a geopolitical, competition. The moment you define a time as a geopolitical moment, it basically means big power rivalry. That is what is the meaning of geopolitics is. So you, as Sri Lanka, policymakers, media, intellectuals, we are responding to this particular scenario with that thing in mind, which is we have entered this phase. So basically what you mean by geopolitics is the fact that we are now facing a big power rivalry. It can be regional, it can be global. So that is the context. So that is why we are discussing this. So that is why these questions like, is it fair, is it not? It doesn't matter, because we are now in it, and now the questions are, you have to raise the question, but at the same time you have to think, okay, how are we going to navigate it? Because the moment you enter a big power geopolitical moment, it means it's going to be really hard for smaller states to navigate. Because
so let's take for an example.
But let me answer quickly that question about.
I want to give another example on a statement that was made on a similar front. Can I ask that question? Or?
No, I just respond to what you said about the minister's thing about nobody responding, which I said earlier also. There's an idea called strategic silence. So sometimes strategic silence also
So Defence Minister of India, Rajnath Singh, on Monday, that's 2 days ago, following Prime Minister Narendra Modi's phone call to Russian and Ukrainian presidents, said that the war was briefly paused in Russia and Ukraine for 4.5 hours to facilitate the evacuation of stranded Indian students studying in Ukraine. Can Sri Lanka ever be in that position, Harda?
So, not
20,000 students who were studying in Ukraine.
So that adds to another thing I want to bring out in this dimension. So, we are talking about big power rivalry, but what has happened in the last 5-10 years is that this big power rivalry also has created opportunities for what we call middle range powers which are emerging. So, and these are the countries which are actually seeking strategic autonomy. So now what has happened is we are kind of using terms which are applicable to different contexts to countries like Sri Lanka. I don't know whether Sri Lanka can ever have strategic autonomy the way we are, as he pointed out with the massive economic crisis.
I want to ask Udita now.
But India is pursuing strategic autonomy and is doing it successfully. That is the result of that.
Udita, now, I mean, we spoke about interventions by other countries. Is it because of we have weak foreign policy or because of the division in political parties, politics? One party is backing China and one party is backing India. Is it because of that or overall we have the weak foreign policy?
I would actually agree with the second argument, that the second line, that overall since 1948 we've had our highs and lows, but like someone in this panel mentioned very clearly, like Mr. Neelan pointed out very clearly, we've come to a point where countries identify certain parties in Sri Lanka with a certain foreign policy posture. So if it's SLFP, it's pro-China. If it's the UNP, it's pro-West. In that configuration, I think this is a bit of the fact that we've polarized ourselves.
You say that if it's SLFP, it's pro-China. If it's UNP, it's pro-West. When you have a UNP president, when you have a SLPP prime minister, when you have SLPP and SLFP members in the cabinet, who are we going to be support of?
So the president can meet the US ambassador here while Mr. Dinesh Gunawardena goes to meet the Chinese president.
In the course of one day, we've hosted Iran. In the course of 1 week, we've hosted Iran, US naval forces.
And we had a senior Russian general in town as well.
Yes.
Chinese,
is it?
And a Russian.
Last month the Prime Minister met
yesterday there was a Chinese CCP member.
I think the crisis, the economic crisis through everything, basically everything.
Is China our friend?
Who is a friend?
Is China Sri Lanka's friend?
How would you define a friend in international relations? Do we have friends or do we have interests?
It's a very simple question, Udita. I'm asking you, is China
I told you, complex situations, simple questions are really bad.
I'll tell you why. Because in 2021, when Sri Lanka was scraping the barrel for US dollars, China insisted that Sri Lanka pay $6.9 million for a fertilizer bill that we did not even receive. Is China our friend?
But
can you reduce international relations to simple questions of whether they are a friend or not?
No, so the Chinese ambassador very categorically said that Sri Lanka has to pay this money. If not, the banks in Colombo will be blacklisted. This is at a time, this is January 2022. We didn't have dollars to buy medicine. We did not have dollars to buy fuel. We didn't have dollars to buy coal. This is a time that it was so decisive for Sri Lanka. Where was our friend? Where was China?
I guess that way there was a lot of bad will created anyway for China at the time. There was a wide perception that they had the agency to say, you need not pay us now, but they went ahead and say, pay us now.
And it was, comparatively, that as far as China is concerned, if Sri Lanka is of strategic importance to China, forget friendship, just on the lines of strategic importance, you'd think that drop in the ocean, 6.9 million US. Not even a drop, like a particle in the ocean.
There's a deeper angle to that question as well, right? To whether China is our friend. There's a very easy way for us to test this. Even if we were to take away the diplomatic and the political decisions that were made in the in the Sri Lanka-China relationship, just compare the way in which our crisis was portrayed by the Chinese media and perceived by the Chinese people, and compare that to the way in which our crisis was portrayed in the Indian media and received by the Indian people. In China, it was just another news story which did not catch the public imagination in any way. In India, this was a major issue where there was a major emotional outcry almost of sorts, where there was a lot of public pressure as well on the Indian government to kind of engage with us and help us.
Why do you think that is, Neelan?
I think number one is because there's a lot of cultural synergy between Sri Lanka and India that we sometimes underestimate, but that's still very strong in India. That might not necessarily be a good thing or a bad thing uniformly, but it's there.
So I actually, because it's interesting you raised this, there's a very interesting article that had been written by a senior cricket journalist, Andrew Fernando, regarding, not really the politics, but you talk about cultural synergies and stuff, but about the role that Matisha Patirana, the Sri Lankan cricketer, who is now playing for the Chennai Super Kings, and who has sort of maybe done a lot to change perceptions amongst the public in Tamil Nadu in a few short weeks. At the same time, you have some in the political class in Sri Lanka who are calling for greater integration and connectivity with South India, not just Tamil Nadu, but also with Kerala, Karnataka, Andhra, and Telangana. In that, when you look at that, like you said, there is a cultural synergy there, going back centuries, maybe even millennia. Considering all of that, should we be embracing those calls for greater connectivity, or should we be cautious of it as far as our integrity, our territorial integrity is concerned?
So I would say in terms of our own policy decisions, it's always good to be cautious. But in terms of our overall strategic engagement, I think an India-centric, remember, being India-centric is not necessarily the same as being subservient to India or as being submissive to India. But I think with the growth of India in the region and with the cultural synergy, as you said, there are things like connectivity and all that, which might be something that we need to proceed slowly with that, even if not with outright alarm. It has to be something that's done quite steadily. I think connectivity overall is a good thing from a strategic perspective, but once again, you guys have really uncovered
the reason that I asked whether we should proceed with caution is because, while at the same time, and you can see when you discuss, like you said correctly, there are relationships, cultural synergies, etc., historical relations over centuries, but at the same time, when you hear some of the comments or remarks that are made, not just by people on our side of the pork strait, but even on the other side, about Sri Lanka is a part of India, we are one, etc. To me, it sounds, and when maps of Bharat are drawn, including Sri Lanka as well, to me, it sort of rings some alarm bells, doesn't it?
Yeah, but ironically, so if we were to look at that Akhanda Bharat concept that the RSS and the BJP have, it's only been in the last 10 years that they've started including Sri Lanka in that. The typical RSS maps that you see of the Akhanda Bharat, they might claim Burma and they might claim Afghanistan, but typically the traditional RSS Akhanda Bharat maps in India do not include Sri Lanka as a part of that ambit. And even now, the official RSS, which is the social movement which created Hindutva and things like that, their official position is still that Sri Lanka is not a part of Akhanda Bharat, but they are more than happy to go as far as Afghanistan and Burma. So I'm not here to downplay those fears.
While that might be the official position amongst many in that movement, I mean, let's say the de jure position is Akhanda Bharat doesn't include Sri Lanka. But it appears that the de facto position is that Akhanda Bharat does include Sri Lanka and even the Maldives as well.
Yeah, I mean, so the Maldives kind of is a more complex issue, if you will, because the civilizational ties are quite.
But what I'm asking is because it looks like, if you look at where India is going now.
Yes.
I mean, these calls for greater integration with India, etc. When you look at where India is going now, and it looks likely that the BJP, RSS, and the more nationalist sort of those pro-Akhanda Bharat forces are becoming more and more entrenched
Certainly.
in Indian society and in Indian politics. In that light, would you continue to advocate for, or should we continue to advocate for greater connectivity with Sri Lanka? Would that be against the interest of Sri Lankan territorial integrity?
No, I think it comes back to the earlier point that as much as India may try to do that, it's also up to us. Actually, connectivity, I think, was first suggested or promoted by us in these recent times. And then it got, developed a sort of a dialogue of its own, and it's going, that's apart from the RSS factor. But we advocated connectivity. So there's a great onus on us, whatever challenges that come from bigger nations, more powerful nations, it's up to us also. And also this, sometimes we judge these relations between countries by the outcome. But in diplomacy, we don't know what the discussions, what attempts have been made, how far we have made those attempts or not made those attempts.
But how do we know, Javed, when it's a bad deal for us? We have been in the losing end and we are holding the wrong end of the stick.
Yeah.
How would we know?
Yeah, I mean, I want to connect this question to the economic crisis. Now, if you see, the Indian, the Trincomalee oil tank farm was given to India in 2003, right? So until, I think, recent years, nothing was done, right, except LIOC was, doing their own thing. And then 2010 to 2015, we saw that government was being pro-China and giving all unsolicited projects. And they were doing some white elephant projects, right? And that caused some, alarming bells, and they came up with, the debt trap diplomacy, right? And then 2005 to 2019, if you see, like, the projects were given to India, right? The priority was given to India. And the Chinese projects were suspended, right? And after 2019, if you analyze, LRT was suspended, ECT was suspended, given to India was suspended, right? And, there was kind of a severe diplomacy with India, right? Now, we saw the unprecedented economic crisis in that backdrop. I mean, do you see this, aligning to one country and, giving everything and, you're putting all eggs in one basket? Has basically led to this kind of crisis. How do you see?
Yeah, I think that would lead to further problems. Now, as you said, and particularly in the last few years, we are bringing in all the Indian investments. That's fine, so long as it helps a country benefit. But I think we need to also encourage diverse investments from diverse sources. That is important, because then we are not dependent with one country. Now, with regard to, you said about the Hambantota port and all, I don't know if this is true or not, but the Mahinda Rajapaksa government, when they were accused, they said that Mattala was first offered to India and India refused. So I don't know whether that's correct or not, but I think it's advisable as far as possible to diversify our investments. We need investment, but diversify it so that we are not in a stranglehold of one country or the other.
And I want to, bring out a point that Dr. Harendra brought up, which is, in this current configuration right now, it's the middle powers that are actually pursuing strategic autonomy. So I want to, there's this whole misconception that Sri Lanka is following a similar line as well. I think those countries are following a diverse foreign policy because they can negotiate such a policy. They are negotiating from a position of strength. We are putting all our eggs into one basket or several baskets, whatever it may be, because we have no power, because we have no influence. So it's actually our weakness, our relative weakness. It's actually because we have no bargaining power in the table that, as Mr. Nilan pointed out very clearly, we are always in a give, or rather a take mode, not a give mode. So those countries are pursuing a diverse foreign policy because they have strength. We are pursuing what some may describe as a sort of diverse foreign policy, basically taking in everyone, taking in Iran, taking in Israel, taking in the US, India, China, because we don't have strength.
And the only thing we can really give is a strategic foothold.
You nailed it right there. Yes, to a certain extent, yes, but whether that has, to what extent that has happened in Sri Lanka and to what extent it will happen, that's debatable.
But Udita, you're 100% sure at a future election rally, President Ranil Wickremesinghe won't say, guess what, I brought the Iranian president to the country at the same time. I brought the US naval forces to the country. I brought the Russian naval soldiers to the country. I brought the Indian clergy to the country. And I brought the US soldiers. So he won't say that, right?
He'll probably say that, and he'll say that shows how strong we've become.
And that could be appealing to the public.
Well, there'll always be a section in the public that will swallow that line.
Nilan, I want to ask this question on this anti-Indian sentiment, right? Now, India, helped a lot during the crisis period, right? Like $4 billion and then, some, bilateral loans, right? But still this anti-Indian sentiment remains very strongly, right? Now, if you see in 2016, I remember when Yahapalya government was dealing with India, this 1990, right? Suez area, right?
Suez area.
So Suez area was under discussion, and the trade union guys, right? They came up and said, this is basically the RAW is coming, the Indian intelligence agency is coming, and they asked whether you want to die in Indian ambulance or in a three-wheeler, right? So something like that. Likewise, this anti-Indian sentiment has been very strong in Sri Lanka vis-a-vis anti-Chinese sentiment. Why is that?
So I would say, number one, I think it's quite a frequent cultural phenomenon. So, it's just like how the Welsh and the Irish sometimes are very suspicious of the English. Yeah. It's kind of, so if you look at a power like China in its neighborhood, Thailand and Vietnam and Indonesia and all these countries are in, litigation against China over territory. And if you do the rounds in, so you mentioned the Maldives earlier. In the Maldives, there's very clearly a pro-India, anti-India faction. In Bangladesh, there's now a very clear pro-India, anti-India faction. I mean, we don't even need to go into Pakistan. So I think one part of the answer is that there's a general cultural phenomenon where there's one big power and small powers, and there's cultural synergy between the two. There's always this rivalry, so to speak, between them, and there are certain complexes that play into it as well. The second is that even when we look at it historically, I mean, there's no denying that there has been a lot of tension between the two countries because of various events that have happened both here and there. So, I mean, this is a country that has sent, you can call them peacekeeping forces, but it's a country that has sent uniformed soldiers into our territory, right? So that's there. And I also just want to add one more thing to the question that you asked us earlier. Alignment and alliance are not the same thing. So simply because we are aligned to China or India or the West, that does not mean that we need to be enemies with the rest or that we cannot team up with them. I mean, look at Russia and Iran, right? There's this big talk of the two of them being aligned. But if you look at the civil war in Sudan, for example, Iran backs one side and Russia backs the other, to the point where it's the Wagner group and the Iranian Revolutionary Guards actually killing each other sometimes in these proxy wars. So you can be aligned and you can be in an alliance, but there are many, many cases where there's a departure between the two. So simply because we align with one nation, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're putting all our eggs into one basket.
So, Udita, you say that we have no direction in terms of our foreign policy. I remember a quote that was made by John F. Kennedy. He says, domestic policy can only defeat us, foreign policy can kill us. So, isn't it important to have foreign policy? A proper directed foreign policy. Harinder mentioned about having pillars in terms of foreign policy. Now, this is not a sentiment that Harinder had made on this show, but even in the previous show, Harinder, in your closing remarks, you said what is important as a strategist is for you to understand that we have pillars to incorporate the foreign policy. So how important is foreign policy at the end of the day? So let's start off with Harinder and then wrap up tonight's show. So you get 3 minutes each.
I'll show you the importance with the question he raised about why we have the anti-Indian sentiment. Sri Lanka is what? We are predominantly a, say, Sinhala Buddhist nation. How did we become major I'm telling you, this is a narrative. How did we become that? We became Buddhists, which charged the single identity because of India, right? So technically we should be very pro-India, but our anti-Indian sentiments actually was set up in the modern state building process, post-independence, when we started articulating our national security policies. If you go study the history of our national security and defense policies, they were all formulated creating a fear of India, right? Which has transcended into the political foray, it has transcended into political rhetoric. And now we talk of it as it has been there for millennia. It was not. So it is why did we do that? Because I think that's a foreign policy blunder. It was easy for us to create the bogeyman. Of course, you can say there's history, there's incident, there's example. What I'm trying to say is, one of the major problems in foreign policy, why we argue that we don't have foreign policy is because we haven't created a mechanism of how we articulate and debate about foreign policy. When you have a vacuum, and we start saying this is our foreign, this should be, that's why we are lacking. So one of the major, one of the necessities in Sri Lankan politics for the future is we have to create a framework of foreign policy. That framework, when I brought this argument, a very decorated, very long-standing diplomat said, so you mean you're talking about a Christmas tree, which means you can dress it up any way you want, but at least you need the tree. So here, we are arguing about foreign policy in an absolute vacuum where we don't have at least the fundamentals agreements of what we mean by what are our key interess. What are our economic interests? How do we, based on that, we utilize the ministry and the diplomacy to, further that. So we are one of the, so hopefully, at least in this election moving forward, every competing party or group has to present at least what they feel is a structure of a foreign policy, because that is imperative for our national security as well as our economic prosperity. So if we don't have this, even 10 years down the line, we may be having the same argument, same complaint, and venting saying we have no direction. So I think it's an absolute necessity that there has to be a presentation of a structure or an idea of what Sri Lanka's policy. We only have an idea, but we don't have anything to point out. So I think that is my major concern. I've been bringing this out so many times, and I've been telling not just you guys, but even the foreign policy, we have to start from where the state has to bring out what are actual foreign policy. I call it pillars because most countries use this term pillar or a structure. Right, so it can be any government. You can align. As you said, at one government country can come and we can align with India. We can align, but that is still the alignment has to be built on this structure where you argue this alignment will benefit our economy like this. It will benefit our national security like this. It will benefit our national economic energy policy like this. So even to create a policy, you need the structure. So we are minus a structure at the moment since independence.
So 10 years down the line, Harinder, you're saying that Udita will be still speechless.
No, so his speechless. It's not because of his fault, no, because we are if you are a strategist or an analyst, we have to provide that analysis or that strategic assessment based on what we really see. So we are not astrologers, so we can't predict on what things we don't see. We work with facts, figures, ideas, and analysis, right? In that is the domain we work in. So even for us, we can't operate totally in blind or when things don't exist. So we argue now, we need to create that. We need to really create that. So our political classes have to at least give us that. No, so we have been otherwise, contributing to fears, contributing to views. And that is why we have always thought of we can be the miracle of Asia or whatever wonder of Asia, because that's a vision. Visions won't be strategized unless you have a plan, a kind of a structure.
That we did well in 2022, Miracle of Asia, that we did. Dr. Harinda Vidang, Senior Lecturer, KDU. Udit Devapriya, Chief International Relations Analyst, Factor.
I think what we are seeing now is not one failure but two. The first failure is a basic, we haven't properly aligned foreign policy with our national interests. This has been said everywhere. But the other failure is we haven't properly aligned foreign policy with domestic politics. Now, as Mr. Javid pointed out very clearly, foreign policy has a very important linkage with domestic politics. You can actually point to foreign policy as an extension of domestic politics, but in Sri Lanka, it's political rhetoric that has gained ground. It's political rhetoric that politicians will keep on spouting because, and this is actually the third and probably the biggest failure we've had, we haven't built up we haven't developed foreign policy literacy in this country. We have think tanks, we have institutions, we have academics, we have people on the ground who are interested in foreign policy, but has that really contributed to foreign policy literacy in the country? In the same way that the economic crisis in 2022 contributed to economic literacy in some way or the other. So as long as foreign policy literacy at the grassroots level particularly is where it is now, politicians will keep on talking, they'll keep on addressing the same, they'll keep on invoking the same brownie points, bringing up the same talking points, trying to score one over their rivals and so on and so forth. You mentioned John F. Kennedy. Sir Humphrey Appleby in Yes Minister once pointed out, diplomacy is about surviving the next century. Politics is about surviving until next Friday afternoon. What would appeal more to politicians in this country? Probably surviving until next Friday afternoon. So that in itself is because we've limited ourselves to this short-termist perspective so much that we've accepted it. So until we improve our foreign policy literacy, I don't see a proper way out. That's my
Thank you very much.
cynical
Thank you very much, Devapriya. Nilan Nirundan, Foreign Policy Analyst.
So I just like to expand on what we've discussed so far. So in terms of this foreign policy illiteracy, so to speak, I do agree with all the points that were raised. I think one of the major gaps that was rightly pointed out is that we have many think tanks and institutes here that work on it strategically. Perhaps the synergy with the media sector and that sector is not strong enough. Maybe if that synergy is strengthened, there is some progress that can be made on some kind of level in terms of pushing the policy discourse to the next level. On terms of the importance, as you know, let's just consider the world over the last 10 days. My God, we've had Israel bombing a diplomatic consulate, which was essentially a declaration of war, not just against Iran, but against international norms, because that is something that cannot be accepted as far as global international norms go. You have Iran retaliating with the largest ever missile strike in human history, the largest ever drone strike in human history. Regardless of what came of it, the fact is that symbolically there have been many, many huge firsts in military history, and we've still kind of let temper simmer down, and we've come back to some kind of period of cold tension rather than hot tension, so to speak. And it's precisely during times like this that we need to remember that strategy and foreign policy cannot be about emotion and personal pride. It has to be about looking at objective data and picking what we think the historically and statistically sound strategy would be, which is why I keep barreling on with this alignment argument over and over again. I mean, show me a list of countries like us in the global south or in an economic situation that where the economy or the per capita income of something has exponentially grown because of their non-alignment policy, whereas you could list a whole bunch of Asian countries which were unrecognizable 40 or 50 years ago from what they are now, simply because they were aligned. So I agree that there are many issues, but I urge everybody to think of history and statistics when we make these decisions. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Neelat. Attorney at Law Javed.
Yeah. As we discussed, we are faced with a very serious economic crisis which has permeated all sections of our society. Now, the economic crisis has turned from economic bankruptcy to political bankruptcy, as we see what is happening in the SLFP. So, with all these internal problems that we have, foreign policy and foreign engagement with the international community has suffered for lack of thought and this thing. But I am prepared to have the ad hoc policy decisions that are being taken now because of the grave situation. But of course, those decisions must be prudent. But I think this point about foreign policy literacy is very crucial, because many years back, civil society engaged in foreign policy discussions a great deal. Now you don't see that happening. There might be an odd article or a discussion like this, but earlier there was great deal of discussion on foreign policy among civil society. Now civil society plays a big role in economic pushing economic policy, political reform, governance and so on. So civil society has to take a greater role in helping to shape foreign policy in the future.
Thank you very much, Attorney at Law Javed Yusuf, Neelat Nirundan, Foreign Policy Analyst, Udit Devapriya, Chief International Relations Analyst, Factum, and also Dr. Harinder Vidanage, Senior Lecturer, Kotalawala Defence University. Thank you very much, Nadeem. Thank you very much, Shihar Raniz, Executive Director of the Centre for Investigative Reporting, for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. The purpose of foreign policy is to persuade others to do what we want, or better yet, to want what we want. Take care and good night.
TV for life.